Thank you.
Do you want to go, man? If I could just kind of get off the healthcare bill just for 1 second. Another one of my peeves is illegal immigration, illegal aliens. The overcrowding in the jails and the prison systems here in California is just ridiculous.
Right.
And what's your take on how to handle that situation, number one, and your views on the death penalty for citizens, for residents of California, and also for illegal aliens?
Sure. Let me start with overcrowding. I actually don't agree with the proposition that our prisons are overcrowded. They're less crowded than our military barracks. And until our men in arms are getting as good accommodations as our prisoners are, I wouldn't uphold the courts as saying they're violating the Constitution by giving them greater space than our men get, our men and women in arms. But assume they are overcrowded. The last thing you want to do is solve that problem by early release of felons back into our streets. And yet, under federal court order by Steve Reinhardt, one of the most liberal judges in the country, our prison system has now become a catch and release program, and it's crazy. And the first effort at these early releases, you end up with a cop killer in San Francisco. You end up with a rapist in Sacramento. You end up with the Department of Corrections not putting a child sexual predator back in jail for violating his probation because they're concerned about overcrowding, and I think that's crazy. Those people need to be off the streets. And if it takes hiring a private company to build a prison quickly, because we can't seem to do anything quickly with government these days, then we ought to try that. Second thing is, we ought to insist that the federal government start picking up the tab for the illegal immigrants in our prison system, because they're there because of a failure of the federal government to enforce our borders and to enforce interior our immigration laws. And then the third thing, I would do what some of the other states in this country do: put the prisoners themselves to work and take the first third of their money they earn working while they're in prison and send it back to the victims of their crimes. Take the next third and help cover the cost of their incarceration. And then take the third and put into a bank account for them that when they have served their sentence and get returned to civil society, that they have a stake where they can, find a gainful employment for themselves without, immediately going back and committing crime and being back in the prison system. And if you do that kind of thing, we'll reduce the cost, we'll have more money to handle the current prison population, because we'll have some money to put into some additional construction, but we'll also cut down the recidivism rate and long term help start addressing the overcrowding problem that way. Now back to illegal immigration. It is preposterous what we have done in this country. We have strict immigration laws that are too strict for the flow of employment and labor to this country. We do it by design so that people will come here illegally and not have recourse to our law when they get abused by their businesses, their employers, or just thugs in their neighborhoods. We have created a terrible situation for them. And we've done it ourselves. We've encouraged it. We ought to stop encouraging it. We ought to cut off benefits. We ought to prosecute employers that knowingly hire illegal immigrants. You don't have to deport 20 or 30 million people. If you dry up the job market, they will self-deport. But I would then take this step, because ours is a country of immigrants, and we have always been welcoming. I would expedite the legal immigration process. I would streamline it. I wouldn't have people waiting for years and years when we have work shortages and people want to come here to take advantage of that. I would make it easy for them to do so. I would streamline the process, but I would welcome them as fellow potential U.S. citizens who are as committed to the principles of the Declaration of Independence as we are, and embrace them as fellow citizens rather than as outcasts kind of in a no man's land, which is what we've done now.
Was that within the scope of the Attorney General's office in general to sue the federal government for repercussions, or is that something where the legislature has to get involved? Or
the federal government's pretty clever. They don't let themselves be sued very often on those kind of things. But there are ways to challenge some of this stuff, and as Attorney General, I'll be looking for what we can do. And you could certainly work with our legislature and our congressional delegation to say, you guys are costing this state a lot. The other thing you can do is you can tell the federal government, look, if you're not going to enforce our border, we will. We don't have to wait for the feds to come in and do that. And I know some of the Republican candidates for governor have taken that stance as well. And we can do that with our own National Guard down on the border and start addressing that. And we can also enforce federal immigration law in this state at the workplace, whether it's in Merced County or Riverside County or wherever. The oath I take is to support the Constitution and laws of the state of California and of the United States. Those are laws of the United States, and as Attorney General, I can not only enforce it from that office, but any district attorney or sheriff or police department in the state that answer to me, I can take over those investigations if they're going to refuse to enforce federal law on those questions.
You have any more questions?
Back to the death penalty.
Oh, death penalty.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of the death penalty, but it needs to be a death penalty that is implemented if it's going to have effect. A phony death penalty, which is what we have in this state right now, does not provide the deterrent effect that you want for it. It doesn't give justice to the victims' families that you want for it. It doesn't do anything that the death penalty is there for. We ought to streamline the process. We ought to give full due process, but we ought not to give such excessive process that it becomes repetitive and the point where people are in 30 years on death row, longer than they were out before they committed their crime. Now, there's a backlog in this state that is huge, and there's no way the state Supreme Court is going to be able to review all of those cases in anywhere near a timely fashion. I would explore allowing the courts of appeals in the state to be the court of last resort, with the state Supreme Court being a court of discretionary review rather than mandatory review. And you then finalize the state conviction and sentence, and then get it over for federal habeas review very quickly. And these things don't need to take 20 or 30 years.